So maple season is rapidly coming to an end, as you can see, considering I'm, wearing a t-shirt here, so the temperature has fluctuated really hot during the day, but there is one more thing that I think I'll be able to do here. This is actually a box elder tree. A lot of people don't tap these for some reason. I think it's because they think the sap doesn't taste good or it smells weird, which it kind of does. It has a really woody, almost pungent smell to it. But I will tell you that these trees have some of the best tasting maple syrup. In my opinion, it's kind of like a caramely malt flavor. But you can see here, I've noticed with these and the traditional, like these are little plastic taps here, but they, for whatever reason, leak quite a bit of sap down these trees. I think it's something to do with the wood structure, and it just doesn't get a good tight seal in there. But we're still getting a decent amount in here. We're probably about quarter full. I might as well, while this is flowing, tap this other tree here. So this here is a handmade tap. Back when I was a kid, probably around 10 years old, one of my parents' friends actually got me started on making maple syrup when he had a little class in his backyard on maple syrup making. And he actually gave me a bucket with one of the plastic taps and tubes. So I was using that for a long time, but I soon realized that I wanted more. And I didn't want to buy anything because, I was 10 and it seemed like a lot of money. So I ended up just whittling pieces of hardwood. I would drill a hole through the middle. Now traditionally, I believe this was done with already hollow species like the Rus family, which is a sumac. Some species of sumacs already have a hollow hole down the center. But what I do is I take a piece of wood, cut it, drill a hole, and then I'd whittle this down. And from what I can tell, these actually work a little bit better for the box elder than your traditional taps here. So I'm gonna end up tapping this one, I think, right over here. Let me get the camera set up so I can show you guys the process. Quickly, as I was a kid, I realized if you just tap this into the tree, basically, one, you're gonna get ants or insects later in the year because of the sweet sap coming out, and there's nothing covering this. Two, if there's any form of breeze and you have this sitting over a bucket, if it kicks up enough, it's just gonna catch the sap and actually knock it off track and onto the ground, so we don't want that. So I ended up kind of jerry-rigging a system like this, which is literally just a 2-liter bottle with a little hole cut in the top here. I'm not sure if you can see that. Pretty simple. And then I just drilled out these buckets. Ignore the second hole that's covered in tape. That was from a different project. But I drill a hole just the correct size so that you can actually kind of thread this in like that. It works pretty perfect, actually. So I'm going to show you the process of how I set this up. What I do is, one, you have to find a nice spot, a nice area where the bucket sits relatively flat. You obviously don't want it falling over when you're doing this or when it's filling. You can always take a stick or something and kind of prop it up. But then I'll just take my little hand tap here, I'll stick it in here, and I'll just kind of line it up where I want it, where I think it's gonna fit best. Make sure you're in nice live wood. I do see a little bit of a opening here, but I don't think that's gonna be an issue. I line it up and then I just mark it with my fingernail. Take your drill. You can do this with a hand drill if you want, but power tools. I have the proper sized drill bit here and I mark it. I have always done about 1.5 inches is how deep I do it. I know some people do a little less. Some people do some more, up to 2 inches, maybe even a little more, but I've never had an issue with 1.5 inches, and I personally think that's probably the safest bet for the tree's health and just for simplicity. You find your marked point, of course. You go at a slight downward slope, just so the sap flows out. You drill. I'll pull it back a couple times and kind of pick out the pieces of wood that stick in there. Look at this. Box elder has that very distinct red colored wood on the inside. I think that's from a fungus. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it does look very, very unique. If you've ever seen bowls or other type of woodworking projects made from box elder, it can be really cool. Anyway, then you take your tap. You can see it's already dripping like crazy. I do a little divot here so that the water doesn't track back on the wood here. I have an axe on me. I do not have a small hammer right now. you take it, you just give it gentle taps to really get it in there. Because of this being a hand tap, if you don't smooth this out well enough, it can pretty easily pop out. So I just try and make sure that it's a decent amount of there. Look how fast this tree is flowing. I just saw it. We're getting like 2 drops a second. We take our bucket, we quickly check where it was lined up. Gotta be careful with this. It's gonna be at a bit of an angle. That's not a problem. Just as long as the tap stays in there, everything is closed. The little trick that I completely forgot in doing this is, since the tap sticks a little further and it's going to be at an angle, you want to make sure that you kind of estimate how far out this bottle is with the angle so that it's easier to get onto the tap. But whatever, it still fits, it works. This thing is flowing a lot. I'm hoping for at least 10 to 15 gallons. I'm not sure exactly the ratio for box elder. Sugar maple is around a 40-to-1 ratio. So just put in simple layman's terms, 40 gallons of sap makes 1 gallon of syrup. Red maple, which are the majority of the maples on this property, are 45-to-1-ish ratio. Obviously that varies from year to year, depending on your spring and how healthy the trees are and whatnot. Box elder, I'm gonna guess, is less than that by quite a bit. I'm gonna guess like an 80 to 85-to-1, but you don't really need a ton of box elder syrup. It's more of like a specialty type, but I personally really like it, and I think anyone and everyone should try it if you have box elders on your property. This one still dripping. It's been around 10-ish minutes now. Still flowing actually at a pretty decent rate. You can see the beating of the water as it goes down, but we're only getting maybe a drop or two every couple of seconds, whereas this one is pretty consistently just dripping away. 1, 2, almost a drop a second right now, and I mean it's already getting dark, so they should be slowing down as the temperature drops. Basically this 2-liter bottle just, you know, prevents the wind from catching that. It funnels down any drop directly into the bucket, and it does provide somewhat of a barrier for insects and other things that, you know, other would-be invaders who want to get into your sap supply. Now, it's not perfect because obviously that setup is essentially sealed. This setup works decently well enough, especially certain, like earlier in the season, it works great. If you do start getting ants and flies, they can try to work their way in here. I have tried kind of like sealing off the edge with very little success, but it works, it's fun, and it's really satisfying to make your own tap out of wood and just whittle that and use it. Feels a lot more traditional and satisfying than just buying a set on Amazon and using that. So if you guys are interested, I could do a video on how I make these. I might end up just doing that anyway, just because I think they're cool and it's a fun little project. But, you know, just let me know if you think that would be something that you'd be interested in. And we'll get back to you when we have this sap boiling down.
This is our first year on this property, so even though it's not Daniel's first time doing this, we had absolutely no setup at that point. This year's maple syrup season was really short for us because of that super warm week we had at the beginning of March, so wasting sap was not something that we could afford to do. When it comes to pouring the sap into the trays, we like to use a measuring cup to prevent it from splashing around and being wasted. After that, it's just a matter of keeping the fire burning and topping up the trays as the content reduces, which does take a while depending on how much sap you have to go through. On top of it being quick, we wanted this setup to be very cheap to make. Daniel knew he didn't have time to build the more permanent setup he had in mind, so that will be a project for next year. He made the boiler by cutting into a steel barrel that the previous owners had left behind. So there is 1 hole for the chimney, 2 for the pans, and 1 for the door. The chimney is from a disconnected wood stove we had here, and the pans were bought years ago for his previous setup. He used a few bricks and some pieces of metal grates to elevate the fire and help it get good airflow. We would recommend finishing the process in the house once it's reduced enough to fit in 1 or 2 pans. Keep boiling it until it reaches a nice golden brown color and gets a slightly thicker consistency.
Alright, so if you're lacking in a hydrometer or a candy thermometer like us, there is another way to determine whether or not your maple syrup's almost done at that 190 degrees. You just take some in a spoon. You grab, I normally grab an ice cube. You can let it sit in the freezer for a second, but then that's going to get maple syrup everywhere from the bottom of the spoon. You just run it under. I normally go till it's about room temperature. Once you know it's cooled down a little bit, just kind of stick my finger in it. Still warm. Still kind of hot. Once it's cooled down, maybe a little cooler than room temperature, it's fine. Then you can just kind of drizzle it and see the consistency. A little bit more. Yummy.
Yummy.
You have to be super careful with maple syrup. That's why we're boiling it down inside, is because it's super easy to burn. Obviously, it's liquid sugar, so sugar will burn. I have accidentally forgotten a batch one time. Yeah, we had to open all the windows in the house, have fans blowing out. It will bellow smoke, and there's a fine line between turning it into like a maple candy and burning it. And then you'll never be able to clean your pots and stuff. I mean, it's gonna be ruined. But when the bubbles start getting more like this, where you can just tell that it's a lot thicker of a consistency, that's when you really need to start watching it because you're getting close. Got the ice cube pre-prepared this time. Make sure you don't stick your finger in it when it's boiling hot either. Oh yeah. Okay, yeah, that feels about room temperature. Let's just see. I'm gonna try to waste as little as possible because this is liquid gold. No, we are not running this through cheesecloth or anything. Mainly because most of the stuff settles at the bottom anyway, and then you can just separate it later on. And this is just for personal use anyway, and I don't mind a little piece of ash in my maple syrup, so. A little bit more. Beautiful.
Pancakes are gonna be so delicious.
I'm gonna just pour this one from the pot, so prepare for total destruction. There. I was a little worried about that. I'll try not to get the couple little gross pieces of whatever. I'll take some of the excess sugar, scrape it in there.
So that was about what, 15 gallons of sap?
Probably 16, 17 with the extra that we topped it off with. This is a little bit thicker. I have made it a lot more watery in the past, and it's fine. We still go through it. You can always just boil it down further later on too. If you end up making a batch that's a little too watery for your taste, just pour it out of the jar into a hot pan. Well, it doesn't, not a hot pan, but heat up the pan and then just boil out the excess water. My favorite part, you scrape the edge of the pan, you get maple candy. Yeah, delicious.
Can I have some?
Nope.
Okay then. After pouring the syrup in the warmed, clean jars, we put the lids on and left it to rest on the counter. The heat from the syrup is enough to make the lids pop and seal them. You could also flip the jars upside down like you do with jams. Once the jars are sealed, they will last a long time in a cool, dark place like the pantry or in the basement. Thank you for watching our very first YouTube video, and stay tuned for our next projects.